we've got apologies from Ian Holmes from NHS West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. We've got Jason Willis with us from Northern Gas Networks instead of Greg Dodd. And we've got apologies from Jim Cadwell at Northern Power Grid and Adam Ashman of Yorkshire Water, but Andrew Thompson is with us instead. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. The organisation I work for, Connect Housing, is likely to be a beneficiary of the Wave 3 stroke Mayor's funding for retrofit of social housing.
Thanks for declaring that. I think we do pick that up later on as well, so thank you for that. Exempt information, possible exclusion of press and public. There's nothing. It's all going to be streamed today, so there's no private element at all. And the first thing really is minutes of last meeting. Does everyone agree? Has everyone reviewed? Unfortunately, I wasn't there, so yeah, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to recommend them as a correct record.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, just moving to the Chair's update. Just a few new faces around the room. First of all, welcome to Councillor Ahmed. Welcome to the committee. You're attending your first meeting. You're very welcome.
Closing time, I suppose that's about the time that you're going to be from the finish.
Yes, that's our aim. We should be hopefully finished by 4:30. So yeah, but we're very welcome.
No, we have left it free, so I'm sure.
Okay. And then Fatima, who's not here either. So Fatima is attending her first meeting. She'll be here representing the Mayor's inclusivity. She's the Mayor's inclusivity champion. She is going to join us moving forward. And as mentioned, James, you mentioned about Gail coming on behalf of the EA and Andrew joining for Yorkshire Water.
Yeah, we have Andrew.
Right, okay, but we don't have Gail, okay. Thank you very much. Just before we turn to the main items on the agenda, I just wanted members to note that the electrical vehicle strategy, which we previously had a discussion on in this committee, is about to be presented to the Transport Committee next month for adoption. So just really to give you an update, and hopefully positive reception. Next item is the monitoring indicators. Guy, you're going to present the monitoring indicators for us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. As usual, we give a quick update on the most recent State of the Region indicator for the committee. I'll go briefly through greenhouses, emissions, building energy efficiency. And there's others in the paper, but I'll do a shorter recap, and then I'll focus on some indicators that we found. They are not in the State of the Region, they are quite new, but we thought they would be interesting to share on the boiler upgrade scheme, the take-ups, the warm homes discount, and then data on electricity consumption and electricity generated by renewables in the area. So in the greenhouse emissions, the latest data we have is 2022. It shows a decline of 7%, and it puts us back to the downward trend that was interrupted in 2021. This reduction is in line with England. In terms of how much we emit per person, we emit a bit less than England. Only Wakefield emits more. And when we look at the components, the main difference between West Yorkshire and England, it's about agriculture-related emissions that we don't emit much due to our urban nature, while it accounts for half of the difference that England emits more than us on average. In terms of sources, transport emissions have been declining, but it's a bit persistent. It doesn't decline as much as other sources like domestic and industrial. And due to this trend nowadays, it's the largest contributor that we have, 35% of our emissions. In terms of energy efficiency, the latest data we have for March 2024 put us on 42% of dwellings with the EPC C or above, which was an improvement of 3 percentage points. So the improvement is in line with what England as a whole had in the same period, but the share of houses with EPCC or above in England are around 50%, and we should get new data soon so we can present in the next committee. As I said, we have data on the boiler upgrade scheme. So this is a scheme that started in 2022. So we have data on the grants between May 2022 and December 24. And it's basically a grant to incentivize the deployment of low energy heating technologies like heat pumps. And so far we got 1,134 grants in West Yorkshire, which is slightly less than 3% of all grants paid in England and Wales. And it is 0.11%, so not 11% of the existing dwellings in the area. In England, the program has been not 0.16%, so more than what we have in terms of dwellings. But apparently, combined authorities are mostly underperforming, and we have the second highest take-up rate behind South Yorkshire. That is the highest one, but still below the national average. In terms of the warm homes discount, we have data for the fiscal year 23-24. Around 3.1 million households received this in the country, which is roughly 11% of the population. For us, it is 15%, more than 150 households, and it varies from 12% in Leeds, more or less in line with the national level, up to 20% in Bradford. And we have the lowest proportion of households receiving the scheme within the 6 metropolitan counties. In terms of electricity consumption, domestic use is around 40% of consumption nowadays, of all electricity consumption. We consume 7% less domestic electricity than England, but within the combined authorities in the North and Midlands, we perform quite high in terms of consumption. And in terms of renewable electricity, we have data now that we can see the progress in the last decades, so between 2014 and 2024. Renewable electricity generated by renewables increased in the period 55%, mostly driven by Calderdale, where renewables increased 2.5 times, and its contribution to our renewables was 14% of all renewable generated to 1/3 now. And when we compare how much we produce in renewables with our consumption, we move from 3% of our consumption being met by renewables to almost 6%. And within Calderdale, the largest contributor would be around 1/5, 20%. Our composition has been growing wind, onshore wind, and photovoltaic. So currently it accounts for 71% of the energy accounted as renewable. And in terms of combined authorities, we see clear differences between, I would say, 3 groups. The more rural ones, or with a large rural areas, so north of Tyne, northeast now, and Cambridge and Peterborough, that they generate around 40% of the electricity, the equivalent of what they consume in renewables. Then we have Tees Valley, South Yorkshire, west of England, where what they produce is around 10%. And then there are the most urban ones where we're included, so Liverpool, GM, West Midlands, or ourselves. Within those, we are the one that produce more renewables compared with consumption, partially because of Calderdale, so around 6%, while the others are around 2.5% to 3%. That's all from me.
Thank you, Guy. Can I ask the first question? Regarding the warm home discount scheme, what do we think is the underlying reason why West Yorkshire has the lowest proportion of households receiving it?
So the criteria will be income and energy efficiency. Energy efficiency doesn't seem to explain it. Income potentially, I mean, Greater Manchester, for example, average incomes are higher, but we know there are quite some pockets of poverty. So I would be inclined to be more on the income side of things, because we don't have an outstanding performance in EPC. I mean, EPC has the flaws, but there's a proxy.
Yeah, I mean, Scott's just said, I wonder if there's a better way to map that. Likewise, I think, for me, when I initially read it, I actually thought, is it because households aren't entitled, or are they just not applying for it? Are they not aware? So therefore, is it a marketing issue? I think I probably would like a little bit more information, if possible, on this one.
We can at least do further comparisons to understand if for our levels of energy efficiency and, for example, deprivation, if we do underperform, and if so, probably there's some communication work. I mean, that can be done all the time, but we will look at it.
Okay, question.
It was a comment, I think, really just to aid, I think, the discussion. I think through the work that we've been doing in Home Energy West Yorkshire, I think there is a real misunderstanding and knowledge of these grants available, which I think is having a significant impact on take-up. In our paper, we'll update where we are with the one-stop shop, and the indication is that we will have a broad signposting of all opportunities of grant funding that residents can apply for and seek information on, in order to spread that awareness that these grants are there, available, and obviously if people are able to apply for those, and we can support through that work.
Excellent, thank you, Jessica. Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, just thank you. And just on that, I wonder if there's a thing about looking beyond our own avenues in terms of pushing out those messages for where they are. Because with the best will in the world, local authorities and combined authorities might not necessarily be where people look. So thinking about community foundations and local voluntary community sector organisations who might be able to partner with us to do some of that signposting as well might be helpful in future take-up. Just a final point as well on another issue. It was just a point on the Tyndall proxy emission reduction line, which is in the carbon budget. It might be helpful if it's added to the CO2 graph, so committee members around the room could see the degree of divergence between our performance and our targets a little bit more clearly. As an aside, it's good to see that social housing landlords are leading on having very energy efficient homes. I guess how that gap can be narrowed in privately owned homes is an area which needs that extra level of intervention.
Thanks, Scott. I mean, I think there's a lot of positives and some really good underlying results this time round. So that's great. Anybody else got any questions for Guy? Okay. Oh, go on, John.
It was just an interesting point you noted in there about the level of domestic energy consumption, particularly in sort of Cambridge and Peterborough, and as it related to how much renewable energy was done per household was higher in Peterborough and Cambridge as well. So just whether or not there was any investigation or link between that, of implying that if people have got opportunity for lower cost electricity or lower cost renewables, is that helping drive the adoption of more electrical power in that community?
It's something I'll have a look at the trends. At looking at the places, it looks like income, it's probably a driving factor. For example, Northeast has a lot of renewable and still on the bottom, but I will have a look on the trends to understand in the last decade if consumption and renewables, if they diverge in one place from the other based on the take-ups.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. Just, I think you made the point about EPCs and the reliability of the data. I was just wondering whether or not there was any sort of proxy information in the sort of the planning information that's held about conversions that have been done since the time when EPCs have come out. I mean, obviously a lot of the EPCs would be vintage, 10 years or more old, and some people will go and make interventions to reduce that, but then there's been a lot of extensions, and I see particularly with the pandemic a sort of an explosion in people expanding the size of their properties. So whilst they may have been improving with insulation and other interventions, they may be increasing due to the expanding size of properties. And I just wonder if planning data also holds some proxy information which we're using to augment that sort of section that you've got on building energy efficiency. It's not an easy one, I know, but it's an interesting area to look into.
It is something that we never tried, but it's great idea because we know the flaws, and any proxy that we can to complement it, it will be something we'll look on.
Excellent, thank you, Guy. Okay, next one is over to Noel. So over to you, Noel, on our draft climate and environmental plan. Exciting times.
Thank you very much, Chair. So as you've seen in the pack, the purpose of the paper really is to receive your final views on the climate plan prior to it going to the combined authority on the 3rd of April. So not long now before we get there. Before I kind of give a little bit of an overview, and I won't go into depth in this because there's a lot of papers, as you'll have seen, associated with the document. So you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go on for ages talking about every single one in there. But just to note, a lot of work has gone into the plan to get it to this stage. So there's a really big thank you to everyone who's kind of provided that feedback and engaged in the whole process that we started over a year ago now. And I extend that to kind of the committee as well for your valuable input throughout the process, and also to the combined authorities kind of scrutiny members for their working alongside us to make the plan more robust as well. I just wanted to touch in terms on some of the points that scrutiny members have recently made. The team and I have had a number of sessions over the last couple of months with scrutiny members to gain their input and make, as I said, the plan a lot more robust. The last of those happened on Friday, so we had a really productive session around that. And they asked that kind of 3 key strategic points were flagged to committee that they've made. So I'll just quickly go through those. The first is around the inclusion of Scope 3 emissions in procurement practices, with a view to it being widened through the CA's influential role as a regional systems enabler. The second is around further clarity on where investment will be prioritised and in which programmes. And then the third point, which is connected, is around accountability for strategic alignment needs to be clearly established and transparent, so conflicts between priorities can be suitably identified and resolved. So there's 3 points that scrutiny wanted you to note. Just in terms of the response of the plan to some of those, I thought it would be worthwhile responding to those so you have the context in terms of how the plan has addressed those. So in terms of the first one around those Scope 3 emissions, so anybody who's really kind of wants to dig into the detail around what we say around Scope 3 emissions, I'll direct you to Appendix 1 of the plan itself. It talks there about Scope 3 emissions. They are excluded from our evidence base, as hopefully you've all seen as well. And we did that because of how complex they are, and also that lack of regional kind of ability to influence those types of emissions. That being said, there absolutely is the hooks within the document for Scope 3 emissions. So they are considered, or will be considered, as part of our own corporate climate plan. So really focusing down on what we can influence in terms of the purchasing power that we have as an organisation. We already do, to some extent, address Scope 3 emissions in some of the programmes and support that we provide. So the one I would highlight is our business support programme and what we do and that advice that we provide to SMEs. So very much helping them on their journey to really address everything from Scope 1 to 3, and also sometimes those SMEs, Scope 1 and 2 emissions are other kind of organisation Scope 3s too, so we need to factor that in as well. And then in terms of our own kind of capital programme of activity, we're implementing carbon management plans which absolutely do consider whole life carbon of the interventions that we're doing as an organisation. So there's really a focus on knowing what those impacts are and giving decision makers that information to hand. So that's on Scope 3. In terms of the clarity around prioritisation and what programmes, so the plan, as hopefully comes out within it, is really co-designed across the directorates and stakeholders that are fed into this work. So we've designed it in a way that the business plans of the combined authority are absolutely aligned to what is in this plan. So there's that direct read across from what is in the plan into what the combined authority is absolutely delivering. So that's the first point. So we're ensuring complementarity there. In terms of how we go a bit further on that, so we talk about further project development being needed on the activity that's in there. We absolutely recognise that. That'll be the point at which we really do hone in on the level of investment and emission reductions that we're going to achieve through this. And then final point really on that is we are clear on priorities, and there's a diagram, I can't remember what page it's on, which really hones down into the priority for this is around the decarbonisation of transport and modal shift and that low carbon heating from homes, but not looking at those in isolation. The system has to work as a whole, and emissions have to be driven down across that system to make sure we do achieve what we want to do in those two areas. And then in 3, in terms of that accountability, so this doesn't stand alone, it doesn't sit on its own in some ivory tower somewhere. This is very much aligned with all the way down from West Yorkshire Plan at the very top of the tree in terms of our approach, through the local growth plan, and then down into the climate plan, the local transport plan, housing strategy. It is absolutely aligned, but it's also from the bottom up as well, because it takes account of what the districts are talking about in their climate plans as well, so making sure that that is representative as well. We will be reporting of progress, and oversight will happen both internally through our board structures, but also via this committee as well. And we set out some of the detail around that in Appendix 4 of the plan as well. We'll implement all of this to mitigate any potential conflicts that might arise. I think that probably covers off kind of the points from scrutiny. Hopefully I've done justice to where that sits, but it gives a bit of context. As I say, you know, this is an opportunity to receive your final views on kind of the plan before it goes to the combined authority. So happy to hand back to you, Chair, and take any questions from committee.
Thank you, Noel. And as you said, it's our last chance. I think it's an absolute brilliant document, and I truly believe this is something that, you know, it will form the basis really of this committee moving forward, and everything should hang off it really. So thank you. So I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions, comments. Jack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I echo your comments to officers and thank them for all the really good work that's gone into this. This is a really good document, and it's starting to set out clearly a bit more of that vision for West Yorkshire, and I really like the case studies, which I think bring it to life. Just want to touch on a couple of points and thoughts. I know certainly council members of the committee will have been approached by some of the interest groups, Friends of the Earth, who are in this space and have looked at the plan, and I think they've alighted on a comment that does come through to me when I read this document in terms of some of the actions in the sort of table sections aren't perhaps as specific and measurable as they could be. There's a lot of really good stuff there, but sometimes it's quite aspirational rather than specific, measurable timescales, etc. So I wonder if we could look at being a bit more specific on some of those actions. I appreciate it's a changing policy landscape and it's not possible for every action, but I do think we should try and be a bit more specific where we can about financing and timescales for delivering some of these actions. I think the idea of a RAG chart or some more visually amenable way to measure it and monitor the plan, both at this committee and in general, transparently for the public, would be welcome as well. And I do welcome your comments earlier, Noel, on aligning more closely with local authority plans. I think it's key that it goes both ways. It's not just a one-way street, that local authorities are seeking to align to this, as well as the combined authority sending it that way. So overall, very much welcome it, but I do wonder if we could be more specific on how we set out the actions within the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Hemingway. Do you want to respond to that, Noel, or have you just got it as an action, as a smart?
I think it's a point well made in terms of that is something that we have heard in a number of kind of forums in terms of ensuring that there is the specificity and that there is that measurable nature of the actions itself. I think we endeavour to do that as part of kind of the work where we are fully developing up the nature of the actions so that we can really hone down in terms of what is the timescale we're looking at, what is the funding cost of these things. So for us, it very much is part of next stages in terms of those actions and making sure that we are really firm. Because I think at this point in time, we didn't want to, there's kind of an overcommit in terms of, given the changing policy landscape, as you've kind of talked about, around putting something in this that ends up being out of date in 2-3 months, something like that. So we will endeavour to make it more kind of the actions more specific as we move into that real project delivery side of things.
I do like the idea of the reg, though, particularly for this committee meeting, just to see where we are in the plan. I think that's a great idea. Okay, Leah.
Hi. Again, amazing piece of work, enormous, and well done. But I just wanted to pick up a couple of things about the transport strategy, and you've kind of gone through the different modes, and I just picked up that the interaction between modes perhaps doesn't come across. I mean, I was looking at the rail and mass transit as well, and those things only work if we've got first and last mile and those active travel links. So it's not, people make these multimodal journeys all the time, so that just needs to be reflected, because it'll only work if we've got that interconnected system.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dye.
Thank you, and I also welcome it, and I was going to bring up Jack's point. I think the case studies really bring it to life and animate it. I think it's very nicely set out as well visually. It looks good. I just had a few things that came up as I was reading through it, and a couple of them are about the responses to stakeholder engagement, and they're in the report at 3.15 and 16, and one of them was about reference to the airport, and clearly in the document you explain the issues around aviation, but I wondered whether there's scope to kind of set decarbonisation of the operations and the building of the airport apart from the actual problem of flying and sustainable fuels and things like that. And then on the next one down, a comment about dietary changes outside the control and influence, and I guess that's partly true. I don't think it's entirely true, but I think there is certainly something we can look at in terms of food waste streams, and what about the food that we're serving in our local authority settings. So I think there's scope for possibly including that. And then, my next one was page 97, was it? It was something about homes. It is page 97. In the actions and the asks of government, whether we could be really clear about and ask about new build standards, and what can be done in terms of improving the ability of ourselves to make demands of developers in terms of the standard of houses that they're building. And then also a comment which I think has just previously been made about linking with local authorities' own plans. I think that's something that, as it moves forward as a working document, is going to be really important. And then just to finish, I was going to refer to the scrutiny, but Noel, you've kind of picked that up, so thank you for doing that. And it's good to see the idea of scope 3s being considered, because it's massive, and we can't escape the enormity of trying to get scope 3s right, both for our own emissions, but also in terms of encouraging SMEs, as you mentioned. So thank you for picking that up.
No, do you want to comment? Or I think Richard, did you have your hand? Should we go to Richard and then, if that's all right?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I just want to express thanks, because it's a very well thought through document. It was particularly taken by the leading partnering and influencing piece. That's something those who've been in the committee for a long time have been trying to get clear and to communicate to people as well. So well done on that. Just two or three questions, really, observations. I think the first one's a reinforcing point from what Councillor Wakefield said. Sorry, and it might just be a question of reframing it slightly, because I wholeheartedly endorse the idea if you go too specific, that's not going to work at the minute. But e.g., when I look at page 23, you get excited. It says, wow, secure, cost-effective and clean energy for all. So you think you're going to read something about how every householder in West Yorkshire are going to get secure, cost-effective and clean energy, and then what you actually read is establish a multi-million-pound fund. That's great, by the way, really happy about that. Decarbonise the public sector, also happy about that. And then collaborate with pan-northern mayors, and you look at it, and you look at the title, and you look at the actions, and they just don't match at the minute, right? But there is a story, which you've already explained, and the story is, at the moment, all this can be is a framework, and more detail will follow. So I just think, just say it, right? And then secondly, on brand and so on, and I hope, I thought this before I came in, this is a really, really good plan. But I'm a lawyer, I like reading stuff, it's really big, and whether we like it or not, we live in an age of how the President of the United States communicates. So we need a RAG, we need something on one page that people can read quickly and say, got it, I can see what's going on in West Yorkshire. We don't need to use caps lock, we don't need to say it's stupendous, but we do need to do something, okay? Because this is too big a thing for a senior lawyer to digest. So if that's the case, and then a couple, if that's okay, a couple of just detailed points. One, we've been through this in the committee before, page 99 talks about the massive role of heat pumps retrofitting. A point that I've made too many times is just about where we're getting partners in from the private sector. Clues in the title, I'm a private sector representative. I'd like to see more on that. I get it's probably too late to change it, but, and then that leads finally to the final one. We talked about the case studies illuminating things. It might not be for now because it's not about the plan, but you actually showcase the joint venture you've got going on with Centrica and SSE. I think that happened like a year ago, and I'm unaware of whether that's progressed, how it's progressed, or whether anything's happened other than there was a nice photo shoot in that. So that sounds a bit provocative, but it's something we've all gone, oh, the case studies are fantastic, but I just literally don't know whether that's progressed at all beyond the photo. Now that might not be for this forum now, it just happened to be in there. So, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think that last point might be covered on agenda item 13. Noel says he hopes so, so we'll definitely pick that up. Noel, do you want to make any comments towards Councillor Dye and Richard Goodfellows?
Where to start? I suppose in terms of the airport side of things, I think there is potential to terms of kind of look at it from an operations in terms of the buildings and on the ground side of things, and separate that from the flight side of things. The buildings should be included in our footprint anyway in the evidence base because they are just a non-domestic building like any others, so they're incorporated into that, and any support that we provide for non-domestic building extends to that as well. So our programmes around that should kind of cover that on the ground operations. And I know we do have that interface with our transport colleagues around trying to make sure the surface transport access to that airport is as sustainable as possible as well. So I think there's things there that help us address some of that. Dietary change side of things. So it's one that people have kind of referenced a number of times when we've been in kind of conversations around what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and I think there's always a bit of a where do we sit in terms of that food waste or dietary change. But I think the food waste side of things should be picked up in some of the work that colleagues do in the inclusive economy around the business kind of piece and resource efficiency, circular economy type of thing. We should bring some of that out there so that we actually can look at those that kind of waste streams and how they can be utilised. But also, if we come back to the point around scope 3 emissions and our corporate approach, I think that kind of work there to look at how do we combine as a collective around influencing our canteens, our kind of catering things, could come into that kind of space as well. So I think that's for maybe our own operations. One, I don't know if Jess, you wanted to come in terms of that new build standards piece at all. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's very much something that we have active conversations with. We need to make sure that new builds are not the retrofit requirements of the future. So it's how we influence and, as the councillor said, demand and seek that change, particularly where we've provided funding through our Brownfield Housing Fund schemes. We need to strengthen our voice to ensure that those standards are met but actually exceeded. And so we'll continue to do that and seeking partnership conversation where we can do.
And then just in terms of Richard's point, so yeah, we can look at the kind of maybe just a quick kind of re-look at kind of the wording on there just to tighten up on that. We can go away and have a quick look at that. In terms of presentation, absolutely. This is just your draft document that you see in front of you. We already have our digital team lined up to be able to kind of do some nice graphics and to do some smaller versions of that, so absolutely will do. And then hopefully, as Chair, you say, in item, I think it's 12, we will talk a little bit about the partnership and where we've got to with that.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Any other councillor patient? Oh, sorry, councillor Ferriby.
Yeah, thank you. Just one point is around the decarbonisation and delivering of skills target, because we've been talking about that for a long time. And it's how is the combined authority going to be the conduit to training and businesses? Because obviously we've got a lot of work to do, but we need people with those skills and we need them pretty quickly. So we need a lot of work, as I see it now, to actually prepare for the next 2, 3 and 4 years. Otherwise we won't have the skills base. It's very much similar like the building industry. You know, we've got a lot of building to do. We want those skills in at the right time in the right place so everything marries up. Like you say, not going back to retrofitting. And I just wondered if you could expand on how you see that panning out, because like we say, there's the monetary in pound signs, but we don't have a plan, and it's something that actually I think is sort of like here and now and grassroots for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So just on skills, so I'll do my very best to kind of articulate the skills side of things. It's not the kind of area that I kind of sit in. In terms of what I know in terms of our colleagues who are on the skills side of things, they certainly do see that a large proportion of their programme of work that they've got for the future is going to be focused very much on the green skills kind of agenda, because they accept that it is, and it's reflected in our local growth plan around it being a growth sector. So they already know we need to do something about this and we need to move on it quite quickly. So I think it's something like a quarter of the kind of their programme, or a third of their programme, is going to be focused on how do we increase that breadth and depth of kind of skills that and training offer that we have, so that people can service the needs to get to net zero by 2038. But I can take that away and get a lot more information for you. I am. Did you want to come in, Jess? Sorry.
Thanks, Noel. I can just add a bit more context to that, councillor. So in the Home Energy West Yorkshire team, we have a dedicated number of colleagues working on skills and supply chain, alongside and with our colleagues in skills. We're developing a skills action plan to understand what we know, what we don't know, and where is our investment best focused to. Because it's not necessarily about new skills, it's ensuring that the people that are skilled can diversify and into new areas of work. And we're very aware in terms of the constraint of construction skills, not just in terms of new build and retrofit, but also the call on construction skills for mass transit and the growing areas of need. So there is a lot of activity commencing and building in order that we can understand where we're best targeting our investment and development of that skills growth.
Is it worth just thinking on that, having that on an agenda for a future meeting this year on green skills? Because I don't think we've touched on it for a while, actually. Yeah, okay, Councillor Patient.
Thank you. I was deleting bits there as I mentioned, so I won't repeat the same things that have been covered elsewhere. But just to add to the chorus of thanks for officers, and also to the scrutiny board as well for bringing those points. Actually, really important that you've picked those bits out, and actually good to see the alignment within the plan that's there as well. Clearly our councils are key partners in this, and it's not for now, but as the plan does grow and adapt and shift and opportunities arise in our various spaces, be they wind farms, be they wetlands or anything else, not going to be drawn on that, it would be important to have some of that local alignment and make sure that sort of partnership working and subsidiarity is in place. So where those discussions belong in the making up, just on Leah's point around the idea about the final mile and just making sure we get the balance right as this goes forward. So it's obviously ambition for mass transit is higher up the chain than active travel, and ditto low carbon heating, clearer ambition than retrofit. So making sure that we're constantly mapping and making sure that those things are in the right places. Mass transit great for Bradford and Leeds, perhaps not so great for Wakefield and Collardale. So making sure we all feels like it works for everyone. And just a bit of a think about the investment and the climate fund work, and consider how that can support the retrofit work that we need to do. And I know that'll be something that's not just discussed here, but also in other things. It's an endorsement, it's just with some little points in there, so please don't take that as a negative.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Noel, any comments to pick up or take us round?
Just to kind of reaffirm that absolutely we're really committed to kind of that partnership kind of working as we move into kind of the delivery side of this. So you know, it as a collective we're stronger, so absolutely we'll kind of be working with our local authorities to deliver against this.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you, and I hope it goes well with when you present it to the authority on the 3rd of April.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing about it, and well done. Okay, thank you. Next, over to Jessica.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an update here in terms of the activity and progress across a number of work streams for Home Energy West Yorkshire, and just a reminder for those, the focus for the team is achieving domestic decarbonisation across homes across West Yorkshire, working towards our collective ambitions for net zero by 2038. So activity and delivery continues at pace across a number of key areas as noted in the report. But just starting with the current activity that we have around social housing. So we have now commenced with our social housing decarbonisation plan, which will be a plan to inform the strategic approach to the delivery of future schemes supporting the implementation of retrofit and renewables across the social housing sector. So we have had a successful workshop with EST, who are leading that piece of work on our behalf, with partners looking at what the plan should have, could have, and they have now commenced with collecting and initial analysis of data from West Yorkshire Housing Partnerships, and that work will be developed over the next year, and we are planning to bring future iterations to committee members, and potentially, I'll come on to a point in a moment, a private members workshop where we can look at some of the data and some of the one-stop shop information that's coming through in order that you can really understand and interrogate that information as it comes available. Moving on, an update on the current position of the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund Wave 3 bid. So as you know, we did make a submission bid to secure funding for Wave 3 to deliver a really ambitious programme across West Yorkshire, which would see retrofit measures delivered to just under 9,000 homes in the region. It was a collective strategic partnership bid with 10 of our registered housing providers joining us in that. The bid was for just over £54 million of grant funding, which would have unlocked £54 million in co-funding. So we really scaled up our ambition and our programme there to take forward the bid. The demand has been significantly high nationwide, and bids exceeded the funding that was available via DESNES. At the time of writing this report, we had received an indication that all grant recipients would receive at least 40% of the bid. The time has progressed and it's moving at pace, and we have now had confirmation that we will receive £25.6 million worth of investment, which is about 47% of our original bid request. So that is now requiring us to reprofile the programme, and we need to submit a revised bid to that value of 25.6 million this week on the 28th of March. So there's a considerable amount of effort and activity underway with the team and in partnership with our registered housing providers in order that we can realign that programme to that funding. In that respect, we will be continuing with what we were already intending to do, and that is seeking additional support through the Mayoral Social Housing Enabling Fund. During the process of our Wave 3 bid, we held a workshop with our consortia partners to understand and identify where we've learnt lessons through Wave 1 and 2.1 around some of the key challenges that are impacting on delivery. Two key areas came out that are really impacting on us being able to deliver our programmes as originally required to do so. and they are the absence of technical surveys. At the bid stage, we do make assumptions around housing stock data, and when the programme commences, full-scale surveys begin, but that does tend to impact on survey results and stock data not being as expected, leading to planned changes to the programmes and delays in project execution. In addition, we are measuring a high tenant refusal across our social housing decarb fund projects, as high as 26%. And this is due to a number of reasons, including resident health, vulnerability, mental and physical challenges, the practicalities of families having to decant from their home while surveys and works are undertaken. So the Enabling Fund will provide additional capacity in both of those two key areas. We really need to provide additional support in order that we have resident liaison officers on the ground, visible, working with our residents, in order that we can really understand the areas that they need support. And we can undertake a comprehensive programme of survey work to ensure that that data around stock condition is right, up to date and relevant. In addition, we will now be using some of the Enabling Fund to meet the gap in funding that we haven't secured through the Wave 3 funding. So the request for both of those activities to accept receipt of the Wave 3 funding when a formal announcement comes through, and to secure the Mayoral Social Housing Enabling Fund will be going towards the Combined Authority meeting on the 3rd of April in order that we can secure approval for both of those funding packages, in order that we can commence activity on the Warm Homes Way 3 programme with our partners, and as we intended to do so. Just moving on, some of the other areas of activity. The social housing, the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership Scheme, delivering solar panels and battery installations to 1,500 social homes across West Yorkshire by March 26, is progressing. The procurement for the installers has now concluded, and we have received the Modern Slavery Act compliance data that is required. So the grant funding agreements haven't yet been signed, as we have had a couple of slight delays in that, but we are on track to commence activity at the very end of this month, and that will run until March 2026. Just coming on to the one-stop shop that's noted there, we have made some significant progress across that piece of work, and we have now concluded a number of activities in terms of procurement. We have appointed a marketing partner and a digital web platform partner. We are in the final stages of procuring the managing agent, and we will be able to make an announcement on that in the coming weeks. And we've been able to clarify some key dates where we will have a microsite launched in late May, which will be predominantly a library of information, but will start to gain some interest and traction, with the full service and the minimal viable product launched in late summer 2025. So that activity continues at pace and is a significant milestone for the programme that we are working towards achieving. Just a couple of other key updates for you. The residential collective buying scheme. Again, the data there has moved on since the drafting of this report. It's a live scheme, and we're seeing some really interesting data coming through there. So as of the 20th of March, installations have now reached 326, with a further 205 booked in. So that has seen a considerable scaled up approach to installations of solar panels across West Yorkshire. And there's some really positive data coming through there in terms of the private sector investment leveraged into the scheme against the Combined Authority's initial investment. And so that scheme is continuing at pace and has seen some really positive information coming through the customer experience, with the scheme receiving a net promoter score of 93 out of 100. Just a final couple of points, just to keep you up to date. The home energy loan product is still live, and that is producing some really valuable data around people's connection to and engagement with. So the pot, as you know, is 1.5 million, and that is delivering loans between £5,000 and £25,000 to apply for retrofit measures to people's homes. To date, we have had 117 applications with 67 in progress, and 26 of those have now drawn down the funds. We've noted in there the report that we have had 47 applications being declined, but they are for a variety of reasons due to applicants cancelling their appointments or being able to proceed at the time, and that percentage rate is in line with market rates in terms of loans not going forward. So to date, the loan pot has allocated just over £147,000, with a further 530 in progress with the loans that are being undertaken. And finally, for me, just to update you on where we are with our evaluation across a number of schemes, and I know it's been discussed at previous meetings. Steers ED have been independently appointed to undertake some evaluation works on a number of our live and now concluded projects. I received the final reports for the Social Housing Decarb Fund Wave 2.1 and the local energy advice demonstrator projects this week. So we can bring back learnings and reflections from these at future meetings, as I know there's been a request from members to do so. I'm more than happy to provide those at the appropriate time.
Jessica, thank you for a huge amount of information you've just imparted. I think you need to take a breath. Thank you. It's really nice because I think 9 months ago you came to this committee with the one-stop shop idea, and it's just brilliant that we've seen so much progress. I think it's really interesting how some schemes have really taken off and others are a bit slower. I think I've got 2 questions, if I may. One is about the absence of the technical surveys and the tenant's refusal. Do you think if we do more of the technical surveys, there may be opportunity to retrofit while residents are still within their homes? Because obviously that is one of the biggest issues. And then the second question is about the home energy loans. And do we really understand why the average loan request was 9,000 and we thought it was going to probably be 16? Are people making a cheaper choice on retrofit? So there were the 2 questions before I can open the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So absolutely, we very much hope having that much better understanding through the technical surveys as to the quality and need of homes in terms of retrofit. We are also testing through our area-based scheme some innovative approaches to retrofit measures, which does allow tenants to remain in occupation and in their homes during those works being undertaken, which is very much something that we want to endorse and see rolled out further. And it could be that where assumptions have been made, a property's in a better condition than envisaged, which does allow tenants to remain in their homes. I think what we also need to reflect is that we need to have that clear communication and conversation with tenants to exactly what the process will be, so that they can have a clear understanding step by step of how this process will work. And if they are required to vacate their property, it will be at a time that we commit to, and they're planned and included in that conversation, where they will go in between, how long they will be out for. So there's a real understanding. So we're managing their apprehension and their nervousness so that they are more included and then prepared to be involved. Yeah. Okay. And just coming on to the point of the loans, apologies, your second point. The understanding of the value of the loans was very much based on modelling data and what we expected residents to go for. There is a real broad spread actually of loan values, in that we have had some very high values, but they're limited in number. The majority are coming through around that 5,000 to 6,000 value, so it's new windows, insulation, some solar panels. We are seeing a direct correlation currently on our loan profiles with the residential collective buying scheme. So that does have a big impact on that. But the plus side is, with the lower values, we can get more loans then generated through that pot. So we're hoping that we see more households coming through in undertaking retrofit measures onto their homes with the available pot that we have at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, any questions? Martin?
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to add a little bit to what Jess said about the Wave 3 bid. Obviously, Jess referred to the bid that's been led by the Combined Authority with 10 partners, of which Connect, my employer, is one, and we're very appreciative of the role that WIC has played in that and the support that they've offered. But Not all partners, not all housing providers in West Yorkshire have bid through the WICA consortium. And although I don't have precise figures because the geographies of other partners, other housing providers in West Yorkshire go beyond the West Yorkshire boundaries, I would estimate that you could probably getting on for almost double the amount of funding that WICA's got, 25 million. You probably get to double that figure if you accounted for all the funding that all the providers in West Yorkshire are going to be investing, and then double it again because we're co-funding on top of the DESDES money. So the WICA-led programme is a large chunk of the story, but it's not the whole story, and across West Yorkshire we're probably looking at double those figures.
Very encouraging. Any other questions for Jessica?
Chair, sorry, could I just come back on a quick point that Richard made? Apologies, Richard, I omitted to note it during my update. And that was around your very well made point around the private sector role. The public sector purse cannot afford to deliver domestic retrofit on its own. So off the learnings that we've got from the loan, we are having conversations now with private finance sector around their role, the responsibility, how they promote other products that offer residents choice. Our loan is just one, and how do we build on the really informative data that we've collected from our loan to encourage the private sector to be involved and play their part.
Excellent, thank you for that, really useful. So thank you, that was a really comprehensive report. But Jessica, you need to take a breath because you're on again. We're going to talk about the reform to the energy performance of building regime, which might actually pick up a few of the questions that were asked earlier, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Chair. So yes, this next paper is looking at the response that we have submitted to the reform of energy performance of buildings regime. So we're asking committee to note the contents of our response, which is attached to this paper. So just a very quick overview. In December 24, the UK government published a consultation on reforms to the energy performance of buildings regimes, with proposals covering England and Wales. And we did collaborate with partners and colleagues to prepare a comprehensive response that is attached here. So the information was looking at clarifying and consolidating regulations, updating EPC metrics, improving data management, and revising air conditioning inspection reports, amongst others. We particularly looked at a domestic perspective from Home Energy West Yorkshire, but we did make comments on broader aspects where relevant. So in particular, we looked at the proposed changes involved in the introduction of multiple matrices on EPCs. The approach to EPCs have been criticised. In particular, they are looking to incentivise the previous EPCs, do incentivise the continued use of gas boilers over low carbon options. So we do welcome these changes that are coming through. And the proposed changes are noted there under 4 key areas, looking at fabric performance, heating system, smart readiness, and energy cost. And there's a number of other areas coming forward around reducing the validity period of EPCs. It's the point that Andrew made earlier around capturing recent and regular upgrades and improvements we very much captured in our response. It's not entirely clear if the tool that would be used for updating EPCs, but we've made a comment if that can be an online system that's live. It allows residents to go in and note where they've made improvements and changes to their homes. So it's a really up-to-date live document. But the proposal is that they will reduce the validity period from the current 10 years to somewhere between 2 and 7. So that is, an improvement there. There will also be a requirement for homeowners to have a valid EPC before they market their property for sale or rent, which removes the current 28-day grace period. And there is additional requirements for landlords, including EPCs for tenancies when one existing one expires, and also now including short-term rental and individual rooms in houses of multiple occupation. So we have provided commentary and generally very supportive of the proposals put forward by the government for the reform. We note that members of the committee have previously raised challenges around the EPC in the current form and the goal of decarbonising housing in the region, and those views have been taken into account whilst developing our response. It does provide a deeper level of understanding and consideration of the energy performance certificate. However, we have noted that there will be an increased cost to residents in terms of having to redo EPCs on a more regular basis. So as I've said, the submission that has now been formally provided is attached to your papers here, but it's a comprehensive paper, so I don't tend to go through each question here, giving the broad overview.
Thanks, Jessica. Any questions or any further comments? Councillor Scott.
Thank you. And I guess it's just more of a comment rather than a question, but it plays into what you were talking about. So there's a thing here, isn't there, about whether homeowners should be encouraged to upgrade their EPC after they've commissioned any sort of extensive retrofit within their homes and properties. And that, I guess, will enable some of the data within the public EPC register to help play into our 2038 target. I think without that, we're flying blind, aren't we, really? And there's just going to be little or no tracking. Luckily, our energy plans will probably help with some of that, especially with digital twins to look at what that looks like. But just more of a commentary, really, on it.
Martin?
Yeah, I fully support the changes that have been proposed. The current EPC regime is not great. One of the things, though, that we're finding, because we have over the years taken a responsible position and tried to retrofit our properties. This is not new to associations like Connect. Unless we've got very robust records of what we've done and the materials that we've used and the performance of those materials, it's very difficult to get the EPC assessors to take those into account in doing new assessments. And that means that you could have, well, I know of properties that we've retrofitted 15 years ago to a very high standard that got EPCs of A-graded EPCs at the time that now we're struggling to get a C on because the assessors are insisting on assuming that they're as built unless it's proven otherwise. So there's the point here is that actually record keeping by homeowners, by property owners, is going to be a really, really critical element of maintaining EPC records going forwards, and I'm not sure that's really been captured yet.
Yeah, it's a very valid point, Martin. And some of the challenges we've had is what will be the skill of the EPC assessors to reflect some of that? Would it still be a broader but still a tick boxing exercise? So there isn't the ability to make narrative around some of the quality of works undertaken, as you said, the materials used, and the skill and application of some of the retrofit measures to really influence and evaluate works that have been undertaken. So it's a progress, and it's a positive progress nonetheless, but I still think there's some work to do there.
Thanks. I think the conversation's been great, and I'm just reflecting earlier on to Andrew's comment and Councillor Dow's comment on trying to get building standards up. I think it all links in, and you know, hopefully the consultation will be listened to and heard. Thanks, Jessica. Excellent. Andrew.
Just a sort of reflective thought on different ways you can harvest data. So things change a lot. So we know that people upgrade their homes and they make interventions. What doesn't really change is their billing. Really what they're getting billed each month in terms of kilowatt hours, gas and electric, shouldn't change unless something has changed. But some of that's changed by behaviour, and I said, COVID will have seen more home working, which will have bumped things up. But eventually we'll end at a float point. So I wonder if there's information in the billing data as well for gas and electric, and how that's changed over time. I mean, obviously, if somebody's made a big retrofit, you'd expect to see a reduction down if everything else was normal. But of course, we've got new normal now, so we need to find ways to filter that information that we've got and provide, I guess, a useful lens on what efficient homes look like in kilowatt hours per square metre or per square foot, as best is dictated.
And actually that leads back to some of Guy's information on the KPIs that we looked at. So it's all linked. Richard.
Yeah, just say on that point, I've got a client who's a heat pump manufacturer. It won't be the only one, but it's just an interesting observation because they've realised if they have the data of how the heat pump is working, they can start sending software to make it most efficient in the household. I'm not giving the name, there's no point, but that I've also realised, of course, there's a voluntary carbon credit offset market, which generally only exists at a industrial level. But if they can start garnering data from domestic places or social housing providers, for example, and people are willing to pay for that, you've suddenly created something that's got value. But the data's got to be right in the first place, and their way around of doing it isn't paper and records. It's to actually get an app basically into it. So there's I don't know what we do as a committee, but that as a domestic point moving forward, that technology side strikes me as quite important, because it could unlock some real value for the domestic market especially. So if householders here, they can get some money off by allowing someone who can aggregate these things into one, then people will start to go for that, because that's cheaper than it was before, right? You know? But a domestic household will never be able to trade with British Airways as an offset. That's not going to work. You need to somehow aggregate it, really.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. Okay, any more questions, or shall we give you a break, Jessica, and move over to Noel? Noel, West Yorkshire Climate and Environmental Fund. Do you want to give us a bit of an overview?
Will do. Thank you, Chair. So I won't go through the paper as usual. I'll take the majority of it as read, but I guess the purpose of bringing that paper to you today really is to get your input as a committee into the emerging objectives, the outcomes and the benefits of a potential West Yorkshire Climate Fund. So what the paper really does is tries to set the context and the narrative and rationale for why we want to introduce the fund. So just touching briefly on that, I think you're all very much aware of the fact that we've got local area energy plans either having been completed or being taking place within the other 4 local authorities within West Yorkshire. So by the end of this year, we should have a suite of local area energy plans for the entirety of West Yorkshire. What that should give us is a pipeline of net zero related projects, everything from heat pumps through to heat networks through to solar panels and the like. So we should have a much more comprehensive understanding of what the pipeline looks like and needs to be kind of brought forward as we kind of move towards that net zero target by 2038. So it really kind of demonstrates that we've got this pipeline, or we'll have this pipeline, but it's the what next. How do we fund that? How do we de-risk projects? How do we really kind of make sure that we can see that scale and the pace of deployment of net zero interventions that we've not seen so far really happen? And so it talks about the rationale behind it. It talks about kind of the barriers that we're trying to overcome with the kind of the fund as well. We talk about what others have done before us as well. We're not unique in thinking about this agenda item. You know, this kind of fund to unlock sort of investment in net zero. So the real prominent example, as you'll see from the paper, is around the GLA and the work that they've done over a number of years to try and develop funds and seek investment. So there's a lot of learning out there. And then it launches into kind of what the objectives, outcomes and benefits of that, and it'd be really great to have your kind of initial input into that, because they are a work in progress at this moment in time. And then something that isn't in the paper but came to light since it's been written is at the back end of February there was a paper that went to the Combined Authority to establish a non-transport capital fund. That was established at £250 million, of which 40 million is allocated to a West Yorkshire Climate Fund. So it gives us a starting point to be able to establish that fund, but also to leverage private sector funding to really make a difference in terms of the deployment of those types of schemes. So that's probably all I wanted to say on that, Chair. So I'll hand back to you, but I'm happy to take questions and feedback on the paper.
Thank you, Noel. Open the floor, questions? Councillor Patient.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a really good piece of work. I guess the trick with this is, and I'm thinking about the context of where we are in West Yorkshire, and a lot of it is semi-rural, rural villages, towns. classically this level of investment will be focused at urban centres and cities. I wonder if we're missing a trick, or whether there's an opportunity here for us to think about how we celebrate much of our place, and think about if we can do some pilot work, thinking about how that some of this transition can be extrapolated on those kind of places that typically don't see that level of investment.
So one of the things we're trying to do with the fund is, we're technology agnostic, I suppose, in terms of, it won't be one particular technology that dominates. The reality of it is that the fund will probably have different streams for different technologies and different asset classes, and therefore, but we aren't kind of trying to focus that in on kind of the urban centres or anything like that. It will be very much taking that broad approach that we've taken with the local area energy plan to see what the pipeline looks like and aggregate up so we do have scale. So within that pipeline of, say, solar projects that might come to market, we may find that there is those solar programmes that might be in rural areas or in kind of our towns and cities. So we don't envisage that we're just trying to concentrate in one area. Obviously, we're going to be determined by the local area energy plan to a certain extent, but the intention is to try and get that breadth of activity and hopefully kind of combine some of the ones that might be more commercially attractive with some that might not be as part of that programme, so we can kind of balance out the risks and also the funding that is needed with attractive ones and maybe less attractive ones as part of that portfolio.
Just briefly, and sorry to come back. I guess obviously Collardale did the lead pilot work on the LEAP, and we've already had loads of people knocking at our doors, including people like Localis who wanted to do a round table, and it was just interesting. I guess just in those early discussions, it's become quite apparent that they're still in that quite mindset of the urban setting. So I wonder, and you're quite right, and I know this is about providing projects for everywhere, but I wonder if some of that local community and engagement stuff around specifically where there might already be ideas around community energy production, or small scale wind turbines or solar stuff, some of that local community engagement is going to be absolutely key in getting this right, so it feels equitable for all our communities.
Richard.
And again, as you know, I'm pretty supportive of this as well, Noel, but it might not be clear yet at the minute. It might be simply that the scheme's being developed. This isn't all going to be grant funding. I'm just not entirely clear. Is this sort of debt and equity, or is it funding, or do we not know at the minute? Okay, and if we don't, that's fine. Then I'll leave a challenge, which is if it's not grant funding, it'll be interesting to see how we differentiate ourselves in giving the money out, because there isn't a lack of investment money in net zero, so there has to be something distinct about this money or the method of how we employ it for it to be relevant. Yes, we either take more risk as a region, or some of it's grant funding, for example, or maybe that's the wrong terminology, but if it's good, because otherwise the National Wealth Fund who are helping you will just tell you that's the problem they've got. It's not like they aren't high profile, but they struggle to get their money out the door at the minute. So.
And just for me to add to that is, do we have a good understanding of how we're going to assess these projects? Because I hear what you're saying. We've got lots of different pots. And as Councillor Patient said, there are some areas, and actually you alluded to, Noel, that are quite often overlooked. So, particularly for this kind of funding, do we have good criteria? Do we know what success at the end of the 40 million spend looks like? Because I feel like it's very new at the moment and we haven't got that information.
It is very new, and we are very much at the beginning of a journey in terms of shaping the fund in the vision or the image that we want as a region. So we are, and it's a brilliant time to be kind of feeding in these types of kind of points, because we are at the start of that process, so we can start to try and design with these considerations in mind. Just to respond to kind of Richard's point around not grant funding, so we haven't made a decision in terms of whether it is grant, whether it is something else. We're working, as you know, with National Wealth Fund to kind of work out what does that kind of look like. We do want our money to work as hard as possible, I suppose, is worth kind of just saying. Whether that then leads us away from grant funding or not, you know, we need to work that through and consider it. But that is a consideration that we need to think about in terms of making our money work harder. But absolutely, we're in the place where maybe we do take more risk on projects as well because others aren't, and we have to fill a gap. You know, market failure is kind of some of the stuff that we're here for as a combined authority to kind of look at.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I think.
Yeah, an observation. The focus of the fund appears to be on zero carbon and you know, renewable energy sources, but the title is climate and environment, and that might imply that a broader range of investments can be provided, particularly around adaptation resilience or nature recovery. So I just wonder if there's a mismatch there between what it says on the tin and what it's for.
I wouldn't say that we're intending it to be a mismatch and just to be focused on kind of net zero and renewable energy sources. Maybe we need to kind of just rejig things a little bit. But the absolute starting point for this is to try and fund as much of that as we kind of can. So it's anywhere from your renewable energy kind of projects all the way through to nature recovery kind of projects, and everything in between really should be, if we can, try and fund that. And this is why I was kind of trying to make the point around, yes, it'll probably will be one banner for a climate fund, but there will be different funding streams depending on what the investors are that are interested in particular asset classes. So I can't imagine that somebody who's interested in solar wants to also invest in nature recovery because of the risk profiles that might be associated with those. It just might be too much of a risk for them to even get involved if we have that. But I can certainly see strands within the fund which talk to different elements of that climate and environment kind of agenda.
Okay, but my observation is the paper is very heavily weighted towards zero carbon, net zero, as opposed to the other strands.
We'll take that feedback and have a look. Councillor Dye.
Thank you. I've just coming in on the previous point about ensuring that it's kind of fairly spread across all the different regions, and the mention of more rural areas. And you talked, Noel, at the beginning about looking at learning from the GLA. So is there learning to be had from other areas that are perhaps more representative of ours?
There absolutely is. So there's one in the west of England. So they've just announced and just launched their fund over in the west of England. So very new, but absolutely we are looking to learn from other people in terms of what they've done, how they've done it, so that we do get a more balanced picture of, obviously GLA is obviously a specific case, and there are others. So yeah, absolutely are.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Can I just touch on the point? Yeah, just to put, you talked about how do we know what good is and what good criteria around this is. So some of the information we've kind of had from an advice from National Wealth Fund around that is good governance and decision making needs to be set up around this so that decisions can be made, and there is a clear way of doing that. So we'll be looking at investigating options for what that might look like as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're now going to move from energy and net zero over to Justin. And Justin, you're going to give us an update on the local nature recovery strategy.
So I will guide you through the pack. So in the agenda pack, we have the slides from page 169 onwards. So if you turn to that part of the pack, and I'll just guide you through the slides as I talk through them. Sorry about that technical hitch. So in terms of the second slide, it's just obviously the outline of what it will cover.
I think in essence this is just a bit of a touch point on the LNRS. As I've mentioned before, we've had previous updates to this committee, and also it's a new process, so we're very conscious as a team to take committee members along with us as we develop the strategy kind of on an iterative basis. So if we go on to the next slide, which is the process and methodology. So I think when we came last time, we noted that step 1 in the methodology, mapping of existing areas of importance, has been completed. And we're now in the thick of stages 3, 4 and 5 of the methodology. That is looking at areas that could become important in the future, and also looking at particular areas where there are opportunities to map ecological areas of importance as well. So we're getting to a good point now, and I'll come to the timescales in a little bit later in the presentation, but there's quite a significant volume of work now taking shape, and again that's the rationale for coming forward to the committee at this point. So if we go on to the next stage, which just recaps on some of our engagement work. Again, previously we talked about some of the work we've done with business, the farming community, community groups, and also a public survey which had a really good response. We're now moving on into the last stage of our kind of pre-consultation draft engagement with a further study. So if you go on to the next slide, which I think is LRS engagement 2. So we're now focusing on where the gaps in our engagement to date has been, and we've identified a particular kind of subset of marginalised groups, particularly kind of young people, so sub-24, some ethnic minority groups, and also people in areas of kind of challenging areas or deprivation with poor access to nature, and also those with long-term health conditions or disabilities. And so there's a further piece of work going on at the moment with, again, specialist consultants that are kind of very experienced in this area, and that's working through at the moment, and hopefully that will give us the opportunity to test some of the emerging priorities and measures, kind of the building blocks of the strategy with these groups as well, to make sure that the strategy we're developing is actually workable for them and they understand it. And the last piece of engagement, which we're just in the scoping stage for at the moment, is looking at ways to engage children. So again, that was another gap. So there we're looking for the 9 to 15 year old kind of bracket, and that's in line with the Combined Authorities Child First framework. We're looking at kind of deploying some of that methodology to engage with that particular cohort in a bit more detail. And I think that's partly bounded from the fact that I think there's a lot of research out there in terms of the connectivity with nature with the young people, and particularly kind of the very young, kind of 1, 2 toddler age up to 9. They are quite well connected to nature. They understand it, they enjoy it, and they appreciate it. And there is something called like a teenage drop off from 9 onwards to 15, and it sounds quite sad, where they lose that connectivity, whether that's technology or other priorities or what have you. So we can do a bit of research into where that lies in West Yorkshire and how we can try and reconnect that demographic with our work. So again, it's in the scoping stage at the moment, but we're hoping to kick that off in the next few weeks as a final piece of pre-engagement work. So I'll just canter on. So just going on to the emerging strategy. So if you move through the slide deck. So we've got a slide there just looking at the draft vision and missions. Again, we've touched on this before with the committee, slightly refined, and now we've added a bit more detail on the missions and what they aim to achieve. So that's the wildlife and habitats mission, ecosystem services and people. So again, if you just move on to the next slide, we'll talk about those in a bit more detail and introduce the themes or the building blocks within each of those missions. So just go through them in a little bit of detail. Mission 1, wildlife and habitats. As the name suggests, that's focused on the habitats that need to be created and restored in West Yorkshire. And these are the main habitat types we've got in West Yorkshire. So we really pull these to the fore, and they'll be the centrepiece of what we're trying to achieve under that mission. Mission 2 is ecosystem services. So that focuses on the natural systems that underpin the biodiversity. So such as carbon capture, soil health, clean air, and also water management is one of the most significant ecosystem services in West Yorkshire. So we've seen that as very much a golden thread, and again, a centrepiece to what we're trying to achieve here. And then thirdly, people. So building on the point I made earlier about young people, trying to enhance that connectedness to nature. And I think we do see that as almost a cyclical benefit where you increase people's connectedness to nature, and then they make better decisions or more informed choices about how they respond to and interact with nature as well, and equally in terms of wider sustainability and climate change as well. So we've seen that as a key strand, and also looking at the some of the communities, both in terms of the people we need to engage with, but also potentially delivery partners in terms of community level biodiversity improvements, and also culture and nature. Again, we've got a lot of cultural landscapes in West Yorkshire, and we're trying to capitalise those on in terms of a golden thread within the document. So just moving on. So this is the kind of the new territory we're very much going into now. So priorities and measures. I think I introduced this concept when we last met, but in summary, the priorities are the kind of the key actions that are for recovering and enhancing biodiversity. They establish what the strategy is trying to achieve in essence. And then within each priority, we have a series of measures, and they're the practical actions of what we need to do. So in there, we've got a bit of an example where they could be focused on particular activities that need to happen. To give you a bit of feel for the size of the document, our emerging strategy at the minute includes about 25 priorities, and then within that, we've got a series of measures beneath it. So we've got around 70 that we think are going to be mappable on the habitat map. And then over kind of probably around 100 things that will be kind of other activities that we can do locally, but won't be present on the map. They aren't spatially specific. And then a range of other kind of supporting measures. And I'll just touch on these in the next few slides. They are in the pack, so I won't dwell on them, but it's a couple of works examples just to bring it to life. So we've got a built environment example there, looking at high quality, accessible nature in towns and cities, and then also a upland nature-friendly farming example and a water example as well. So I won't go through the detail of the word in those, but that should just give you a bit of a feel for how the strategy would work. And then in terms of the map, on the developing the local habitat map slide, there's a bit of an infographic-y type thing there. I think it's fair to say it is a complex process developing the mapping. I mentioned before, there's kind of just under 100 things that we want to map on the habitat map. And it's quite a sensitive process. So what we have done is devise quite a network of specialists and stakeholders. So whether they're landowners, experts in the field, or delivery partners, and they're actively working on the methodology, or what we call the recipe for each of these mapped measures. And we're going through a process now of developing that methodology, working on that with our research and intelligence team, drafting the map, and then playing that back to stakeholders to make sure it's right. So there's a lot of iterative work going on there, and that's what we're very much in the thick of at the moment. And then the next slide just shows you it probably doesn't come out particularly well in the pack, just an example of what we've mapped in terms of that stage one, which is the existing areas of biodiversity importance. And then if you just go on to the next slide, that just gives you a bit of a feel for the emerging structure of the LNRS. Again, it's quite small typeface there, but hopefully you can read that in the pack. And essentially, I think there's a written element of the LNRS, which committee members will see kind of informally in the next few weeks and months, and then also the habitat map. But what we're trying to do is make the main document quite snappy, quite legible, because there's a lot of information there. And then there'll be kind of more of a broader family of documents with annexes and supporting documents which people can use, whether that's as a developer or a farmer, a landowner, or a community group, to pick up and be able to use in a day-to-day basis, because obviously it is a statutory document, so it has got a set format to it, but we've tried to make it in a way that it is usable. Good. And then just on the last few slides, so just on the timescales, the thing to note is, unfortunately, the timescales have slipped. I think in essence, because of the scale of the mapping, I think it's been the thing that's really come to the fore for us. We have put measures in place to kind of do that at pace. We've got a dedicated GIS kind of mapping officer in the team that's working on that flat out as their sole work really. But still, it's taken a lot of time. That iterative process of refining is taking a bit longer as well. And also, we're kind of middle of the pack across the other, it's 48 in total LRS areas. Some of them are published already, and we're taking the learning from that, and equally some of the mistakes that they've potentially made or pitfalls they've kind of fallen into. So we're building in a bit more of a robust process to make sure that what we get at the end of the process is robust and can stand its kind of test of time, really. I think, as I mentioned before, government have been quite flexible in terms of when we would review the LNRS, but indicatively they said between 3 and 10 years. So it has got to be something we get right. We can't really rush this unnecessarily. So broadly, we're thinking of public consultation kind of October, November this year, and then the publication of the final version spring 26. I think the thing to note is in terms of kind of decision making and directing biodiversity improvements, once we consult on the document, it will carry some weight in that process, whether it's in terms of planning as well. So we can at that point start to direct biodiversity improvements into the areas that, as a partnership, we think have got most weight and priority. So if I just skip through these last final slides, just in terms of the delivery and how it will be used, again, I've touched on this a few times previously, but I think it's got a range of uses, and again, that's part of the reason why we've developed that bit of a framework or a family of documents to cater for those different markets. But I think in essence, we're talking about it being a criteria for future government funding decisions, so it will guide investment, also kind of corporate investments that people might want to make in kind of environmental improvements or nature recovery, and also supporting communities to do activities in their area, whether it's something that's kind of formally mapped or something that we've just suggested that could happen and offer some benefits in local areas. And also it could guide investments in future nature and carbon markets as well, particularly thinking about peat restoration there. And then just moving on to the last couple of slides. So monitoring, I've just taken that as read, it's just for information there. I have raised some discussion points in the slide deck, but obviously kind of welcome to open it to the floor. But I think what we want to kind of touch base on and just sense check with you at this point is from the engagement point of view. Do you think we've done enough? Is there anything that's, other than the gaps that I've identified there, that we need to do more on? And then in terms of the vision, mission and priorities, do we still think they're going in the right direction and they set the framework for the LNRS in the right way? And then delivery is just, I think, the thing that we're not worried about, but just making sure that it's something that people can kind of pick up and use, whether that's from a developer and landowner point of view or communities. So if there are any thoughts you had on the ways we can kind of galvanise that delivery, that would be welcomed as well. But obviously general questions are also appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Justin. I think if it's okay, I'm just going to kind of start. I mean, I see this a bit like the climate and environmental plan. Once we get this right, it could be overarching with things hanging off. So some of the questions that I've got may be parked, but how does this link to the biodiversity net gain stuff, which we'll talk about next? How about businesses and planning, and how can they get involved? Link this to the local natural green space KPI that we talked about earlier. But actually, you're right about spending time getting it right up front. But my other worry is, once it's launched, how do we keep it live? Do we make sure there's enough funding to keep it going? Because it will be a brilliant piece of work, but it could be outdated pretty quick as more and more work is done. So I think just thinking about that whole business model beyond the publication, Justin, is going to be really quite important.
Thank you. I've just come back on those points. I think in terms of the linkages with BNG, we have, as we've been working through the priorities, the measures, and equally the mapped elements, which we're getting to now, we've got that kind of semi at the forefront of our mind. I think the thing to emphasise with BNG, it's a government tool that's out there at the moment, and we're very conscious that those things can come and go quite quickly sometimes. So I think we have, as a team, been quite mindful of just being true to the purpose of the LNRS in terms of nature recovery, and those tools could interplay and change in the background. I think as it's currently geared up, the main interface with BNG is the mapped elements, which I mentioned again, which is why we're labouring to get those right. They do attract a kind of a positive weighting. So it's essentially, it's broadly kind of cheaper for somebody to plant a tree in an area which is LNRS compliant, i.e. mapped, versus somewhere that isn't. But it is an open market. So again, it's around that wider system of putting the LNRS out there, making it legible, making it understandable, making sure people are aware of it as much as anything else. So we are mindful of that, but then equally there are other things out there, kind of elms, kind of some of the environmental land management support that's provided to farmers that we also need to be mindful of and cater for. So the only thing that government has been clear on this in terms of the delivery phase today is that it will be used as kind of a direction tool for future funding bids as well. So again, that flexibility is key. In terms of business involvement, we did quite a good round of business engagement, particularly through UK Reef. We had a roundtable event with some kind of investors and developers, etc. We're looking to bake some more into that engagement phase when we got to public consultation, so we're mapping that out at the moment. And then also within that family of documents, we're probably going to be having some kind of business developer user guide, again, which will talk to that audience particularly. And then equally, kind of scamping around a little bit, but DEFRA have intimated that the Combined Authority's role in this process, which currently is a responsible authority, and they're potentially looking at extending that into a delivery role. We're not convinced that it's going to come with any particular cash to put spades in the ground and do direct delivery, but it's convening partners, pulling pipelines together, and also looking at the kind of managing the funding cocktail that might go into some of these sites. So again, engagement with the business community through that process will be key. It's just a bit unfortunate that we're getting to this kind of late stage in the process and haven't really got clarity on what they've got in store for us just yet. But the business engagement will be key to that part. And then keeping it alive and ensuring it will be getting outdated, and that is difficult because it is set in stone once it's completed. I think we need to work through again that kind of delivery role and how we pull those partners together. There could be some kind of forum or panel that we convene, and that might be how we kind of incrementally kind of build that partnership and make sure it's alive in people's mind as a key strategy for the region, really. I think that's broadly everything.
Thanks,
Jeff.
Justin. Andrew, you had your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a really interesting. It's a really interesting paper, very comprehensive. I mean, I can see water as a golden thread, and from where I'm sitting, that's a very key piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Lots of interconnectivity, and I'm interested in how it interplays with the last agenda item as well, in terms of when you've done all the mapping of priority areas and areas for action, done all your geospatial mapping, etc., and you start to come and identify areas for intervention. That's when potential for tapping into pots in potential funds comes in, no doubt. I think the need for clear, outcome-driven KPIs is really key, and I would support that, Chair, in terms of the comment you've made. I think there's some other things in terms of interplay generally with the climate adaptation, climate net zero journey, is that so much of the nature resilience as a ecosystems as a service sort of suggests that you can do a lot of things, but if we don't tie those threads together in terms of the ecosystem benefit, in terms of flood alleviation, in terms of avoiding damage to properties, which would undo all of the interventions we have in, let's say retrofitting them, etc. If properties get flooded out or they get damaged through storms, it's going to undo it. So the ecosystem services piece of this has tremendous value, and connecting that value to the net zero pathway and journey, I think, is quite important. As you said, this will end up as a document which is a sort of an evergreen document. It's not going to have a life beyond it being articulated, but I think it has to sort of find its way into the other strategies and the other threads to give them a life and to continue the sort of the legacy. So it's how you feed it into the other pieces, I think, will be key to the success ultimately.
Thank you. So I think through that engagement process, I talked about the various kind of community groups and external parties, but also we are doing kind of a policy-based engagement as well, kind of linking in with the policing team, the housing teams, etc., and trying to embed it in those areas, particularly transport and planning as well. We're trying to make sure those links are really clear. I think in terms of the KPIs, we're starting to map those out at the moment. We've got kind of a framework in place at this current stage. And there's kind of two elements to that. There's the kind of delivery on the ground, which at the moment we're not going to be directly responsible for, but I think we potentially will have that oversight role in that area, but also the community element of things as well in terms of that connectedness to nature. And that's something we're trying to capture now as a baseline position, and then be able to kind of just monitor and see how that improves in the future. And equally, community delivery, that is a bit of a gap, certainly in some areas at the moment, and that's something we can try and manage and accelerate as well. Thank you for comments.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to Councillor Dye and then Councillor, who was first? Councillor Hemingway, then Councillor Page. I'll go to Councillor Dye first, because you were definitely first.
Thank you. So I just wanted to pick up on a few points. Clearly, I mean, this is a really, really important piece of work, and it's absolutely necessary. And I was picking up on some of the things you were saying about engagement. So the engaging with young people, I assume that the strategy involves schools. Does it involve teacher networks? Because I'm sure all of us will be aware of teacher networks across the city who are specifically focused on climate work. And then something I wrote doesn't make sense. Community groups connect communities to the strategy. Oh, I think in your questions you had something about how do we connect communities, how do we think we can get communities to value nature. And again, you know, there must be hundreds of community groups across the authority who we could engage with on that. And then my third point was about sharing the map and using that to get people to engage. You know, when the piece of work about getting people to put pins in where they see nature recovery happening, is that something that can kind of continue and get bigger, and we can see people getting engaged by seeing where things are happening in their local communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think in terms of school engagement, the first piece of kind of young people engagement that we undertook was with Greenhead College in Kirklees. And that was a really good piece of work. I think it's in the slide deck in terms of the manifesto they created. Obviously, that was a snapshot, and equally quite an older kind of young person's demographic. The next piece of work that we're looking at, that kind of 9 to 14 bracket, we are using potentially the schools networks. That is something that's I think we used for the big climate chat previously with the mayor. So looking at using that experience to again use that network and the teachers in that grouping as well. To push those messages out, and equally kind of, as I mentioned before, that KPI around connectedness, we really want to baseline that position locally and see where we're at as a region in terms of that connectivity with nature from our, well, across all population groups, but equally the children, and then see if that actually we can affect any change on that over the next few years post LNRS publication. The pin map that you mentioned that we used for the public survey, that was a really good tool. We got a really good response. And we are looking at ways to kind of keep that live, and again, that could be something that we could also use that to kind of, from a informal basis, kind of monitor delivery as well. Where if people are seeing activity happen on LNRS sites, for example, they could drop a pin on the map, and that could be a way to kind of have some live commentary or something on that. So that's something looking at, because you did get a really good response, the interactive map. And then in terms of wider community involvement, kind of thank you for those comments. I think we have got a lot of community groups on our existing kind of database network where we've got kind of the ability to kind of do mail outs to them, and we've also got a regular newsletter that we use, and so we will keep using that tool as we go through the process. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Hemingway.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very much agree with Councillor Dye's comments there. In terms of the plan and the sort of baseline where we're coming from, I know a lot of the individual schemes will be underpinned by data and that will be linked to them. I do wonder if we could have a sort of baseline summary of the state of nature, not obviously in the detail that some nature charities and ecology organisations are able to gather, but just a sort of general position statement of this is where West Yorkshire's nature is in these particular habitats and areas, this is where we're going to, just to set the scene really for some of these actions. Really support the idea of a forum to engage with some of the landowners and key groups on this. In using the Wakefield example, we have huge swathes of cereal crop farmland in the south of Wakefield, and getting farmers involved in terms of hedgerow preservation and enhancement is going to be absolutely critical, because we have some really good practice and we have some really bad practice where people are still taking hedgerows out to facilitate farming. So I'd be interested in how we make sure that engagement transitions into almost a partnership and something that's ongoing, not just part of this consultation. So those 2 points really about, can we get some more baseline information of some form as context to the plan and where we're going, and then how are we going to make sure that that engagement with landowners keeps going throughout the consultation and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the baseline summary, that will be, I think, when we publish the consultation draft, there'll be some evidence around that in terms of where we're at as a region, and equally kind of evidencing some of the decisions we've made at that stage as well. Then obviously that will be transferred into the final version once it's published. So we'll keep that up to date as we go through from a monitoring point of view. And in terms of engagement and the partnership post-publication, I mentioned before about DEFRA thinking about combined authorities having a delivery role or coordination role for LNRS post-publication. I'd see that as the main tool to make that work. Obviously, we'll have kind of a high-level committee or like a partnership forum, but I think there could be other subgroups within that, whether it's the business community or community groups, that we could continue to engage and kind of coordinate with. So I think that could work really well. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And Councillor Page.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pull a little bit more of that golden thread around water while you're in the room, really. It feels like a big opportunity, and I think we've got a unique opportunity here because of the sheer amount of blanket bog and peatland that needs restoring. Obviously, brilliant for ground nesting birds and stuff. I'm not going to list them all. My favourite's the curlew. But, you know, and as well as the idea of driven grouse moors being on their way out, as that becomes less of an appealing thing for large landowners, but perhaps a big opportunity for other large landowners like yourself. We've obviously got loads of SSIs and SPAs and SACs around here, so big opportunity to sort of do a lot of that work there. Really good to hear about the sort of connections with White Rose Forest as well. And I'm thinking about that interconnectivity as well with all of our work around flood resilience and adaptation. Sorry to be boring, I'm from a flood hit community, so I always take the opportunity to make sure that's done, as well as some of that urban context. And this is looking at you as well from Yorkshire Water and thinking about sustainable urban drainage, anything that can help slow that water, so ease the impacts that it has on organisations that do have something to do with water as well. And then I was just briefly thinking about engagement as well, and as I do a fair bit of fell running and hiking, and I've noticed over a few years, and I'm sure other people have as well, that the people who are accessing, the communities that are accessing the uplands look a lot different than they did 5-10 years ago, from the Muslim hikers and everyone else. And some of that's about, accessing it, and it's something free to do. So if you can buy a cheap pair of boots, you can access the uplands, and it's great. You know, experiences out in the real world cost a lot of money at the moment. So I think there are groups and opportunities for us to do some of that meaningful engagement that already exist, and where we don't know them, they will have the routes into those other opportunities too.
Justin, do you want to comment, or shall I move straight over?
I think that's more for noting, really.
More for noting, yeah. Okay. Is it Jason?
Yeah.
Jason.
It's just an observation, really, in the links into business. And I know at NGN we have volunteer days, and we can take 2 volunteer days each. We have 1,000 employees in NGN across the north of England, and I think it'd be a really good thing to tap into is with businesses and looking at volunteer day companies that all offer volunteer days, linking in with the nature partners, the Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, etc., and linking that into the plan.
Yeah, it's a really helpful suggestion. I must admit that wasn't really on our radar, so that's we'll take that on board and then think about how we can build on that as we go through the engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. Any more questions for Justin? Otherwise, we're going to get Justin to talk about biodiversity net gain and what we're doing about it.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, biodiversity net gain responsible body. So very much linked to the previous item. I think it's important to note that this is quite a niche role, but it's not biodiversity in its wider sense. So just to go back a step in terms of the issue, biodiversity has obviously become mandatory now, and the 5 districts across West Yorkshire have been kind of grappling in terms of how to deliver that. locally, but also within areas of land they currently own, so kind of local wildlife sites or parks. Leeds City Council have developed their own model, special purpose vehicle, which under the proposed approach that we're putting forward in this paper there would be some alignment with the approach for the other 4 districts. And mainly there it's about creating a kind of a streamlined and user-friendly service for the development sector in this area. In terms of the responsible body role, as I mentioned before, there's a conflict where a local planning authority has 2 hats essentially in the BNG process, where they're a planning authority and they're an owner of land. In that scenario, DEFRA, through legislation, requires them to have a responsible body in place or some mechanism to remove that conflict. So they approached the Combined Authority and asked us to kind of investigate for them. And it essentially, responsible body, kind of what it does is outlined at paragraph, I think, 3.4 of the report. So essentially, it sets up a contract between us, the responsible body, us, and the landowner, which is the local authority, to govern the restoration of a particular site, a habitat bank site. It then registers that habitat bank site with the contract in place, which is what we call a conservation covenant with DEFRA. And then it ensures the landowner, which again is the local authority, carries out these various kind of ecological improvements on the site through monitoring arrangements or site visits by a trained ecologist. And then we, over a 30-year period, would monitor the site to ensure it's kind of managed appropriately, and then submit annual returns to DEFRA. And then finally, which hopefully we'll never get to this point, the responsible body role carries with it enforcement powers in the kind of unlikely scenario where a landowner had carried out some ecological works to a standard that wasn't suitable, or potentially the habitat had died or for some kind of reason. So when the 4 local authorities, so that's kind of Calderdale, Bradford, Kirklees and Wakefield, first approached us, went through a range of options, and they're summarised at paragraph 310. I think in essence, I think what we arrived at, that the CA becoming a responsible body had most alignment from a strategic point of view, so it lined up kind of delivery potentially with what we were trying to achieve through the LNRS, thereby ensuring that BNG was targeted to the areas that had most impact and accelerated delivery. Also, it provided a simplified process for developers across West Yorkshire, so noting that it's a separate process in Leeds, and then we could end up under some options with a fragmented approach across the other 4. So we could have different geographies doing different approaches across each district, which isn't easy for people to navigate. And also we concluded that the CA becoming a responsible body was quite deliverable in the short term. I think it has taken a lot of work to get it to this point, but we're hopeful to be operational and accepting kind of habitat bank unit sales this summer, in effect. And with that, that gives us the benefit of being able to potentially kind of unlock any or reduce any impacts on the development sector in terms of stalling development, which can be a risk if you can't kind of discharge or find a way to offset your biodiversity losses on site. So in terms of timescales, what's happened so far is that we've developed an application to DEFRA that was submitted on the 10th of February. They have up to 12 weeks to consider that application. And then alongside that work, we've also done some kind of resource mapping and engagement with the private sector, kind of ecological businesses, to look at how we could deliver the service. The plan now is to potentially, subject to DEFRA's approval and obviously the views of this committee and then the Combined Authority on the 3rd of April, is to hopefully be live by May or June this year. And I think that'll be quite positive for the region. And equally, we've got potentially a range of habitat bank sites, not so much ready to go, but in a pipeline. So initial scoping has looked at kind of 15 across the 4 districts, and with potentially kind of 5 to 7 able to come forward over the next kind of 12 to 24 months, which obviously it's an open market. Developers may choose not to offset their impacts locally, but like I said before, the BNG system is geared toward local delivery where possible, Hopefully we should be able to attract or retain some of that biodiversity investment locally. So that's broadly kind of everything in a summary there, Chair. Obviously, seeking the committee's endorsement today prior to going to Combined Authority on the 3rd of April for a formal approval to become an RB, a responsible body. Thank you.
Thanks for the update, Justin. I think Martin's first question.
Thank you. Yeah, really welcome this. I noted the focus was on local authority landowners, land-owned by local authorities. And I appreciate the links to the LNRS and those strategic sites, so I get all that. I would like to see at some point the opportunity for community-owned land assets to be included in this. There are models around the country. I'm thinking of the Green Estate in Sheffield, who are, as a local community voluntary sector organisation, do a lot of good work in this space, and I think there's lots of opportunities for community-led organisations who may own or wish to own or be bequested land to actually enhance it and make really good use of BNG funding to help do that. So just it feels like restricting it to local authority landowners is a bit monopolistic.
Thank you, Martin. I think with this, it's very much baby steps. It's a new process. We've put a lot of resource into it at this stage, but it is geared to be flexible. So the idea was we've got quite regular review points in the service, and we'll look at then, if it's operational and working well, and equally that there's market demand. I always, when I'm selling this to directors and kind of explaining it to them, I talk about it in terms of opening a shop. We can make our products as shiny as possible. The shelves are stocked, the doors are open, but if nobody comes through the door, it's not really going to work. So we're just trying to gear up sequentially on this. So that is very much on our radar if it does work and if there is appetite there as well. So thank you, Martin.
Excellent, Leah.
Thank you. And again, welcome it. Building on what Martin said, is there opportunity to look at land within public highway, public realm, and some of the schemes that where we're delivering SUDs, or where we're delivering tree planting in streets which benefit communities, sort of much really locally to them, and sort of having that as part of the BNG offset as well.
I think in principle, yes, that could happen. It would depend on the land ownership. I think some of the sites you mentioned there are probably in local authority ownership anyway. So that is something that could fall into that pipeline of schemes which I mentioned. And I think there are some kind of highway verge type opportunities that have been identified. I think the thing we're conscious on with those is that some of those narrow kind of strips are quite problematic in terms of managing them in the longer term, and also from encroachment. So we're just trying to go through a process of finding a way to manage those and kind of minimise any risks if we take them forward. But yeah, they are on our radar.
I just wondered if there's a way of kind of enhancing highway schemes that you were doing anyway with that funding, so that you get kind of more out, like Greater Green in Sheffield, or so you're kind of helping the added benefit.
I think that's something we're doing across the team. So I think the one worked example there is the mass transit programme. So my team are working quite closely with the mass transit team on that in terms of baking in those on-site biodiversity and environmental improvements within the scheme. So this is slightly different than this is offsetting in terms of the BNG work we're talking about in this item. But in terms of on-scheme delivery, yes, that's very much something that I'm trying to kind of drill into other colleagues' minds in terms of what we can do on site within the funding envelope that we've got for particular schemes and investments.
Richard?
Yeah, just on appreciate it's not the main point, but sorry, you just sparked something there. I just there's anybody from Yorkshire Water here, just letting us out of it today. Sorry, but yeah, so I work with some other water companies where they're actively working with, where the report back would be Yorkshire Water and West Yorkshire working really closely together on SUDs, because they've got a lot of SUDs work to do, and a lot of the impact that they can make is in land that they don't own. So it might be highways, it might be street works going on, and it's just, I appreciate I've gone slightly off agenda, it's just, I didn't hear the words Yorkshire Water whenever you were speaking, coming back on that point, and so there's just a point there that there's other regions where the water undertakers are actively go into the WICAs and the local councils, and you'd be telling us about all the work you're doing with Yorkshire Water on this point. So.
Thank you for that. I think in terms of our flooding programme, I think we have got quite a broad partnership on that, and we are collaborating with a range of partners. So I think Yorkshire Water Europe are in our mix in terms of some of the schemes we're supporting and co-funding. I think moving forward, I think you're probably right, there is a bit of a gap on that. We could do more. So the various kind of policy and strategy tools in other regions, so kind of Connected by Water in South Yorkshire and Living with Water in Humberside, where they've got a more deeper partnership. Not just with the water company, but also the Environment Agency as well. So it's something we're starting to scope out. It's quite timely actually, because I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago we had a bit of a scoping workshop with partners to flesh out what that could look like locally. Yeah, timely comment, and we're definitely working on that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope it all goes well when you put it to the Combined Authority on the 3rd. So yeah, and keep us posted, because it'd be great if we could go live sooner rather than later. Okay, last item on the agenda, last but not least, Noel.
Got me again, unfortunately.
Yeah,
sorry
over to
everybody. So this paper is around, and hopefully answer some of the questions perhaps there was posed as part of the Climate Environment Plan item around where we're at with the Strategic Climate Environment Partnership, which you all had a paper on, I think, at one of the meetings last year. Can't remember quite off the top of my head, but anyway, we've moved on a little bit in terms of where we've got to with that. And what's presented in the paper is the proposed kind of draft action plan for the partnership over the next 12 months. And this is focused around 5 key areas. And this has been developed as a result of kind of conversations with the partners about what it is that they think they can work with us on over the next kind of 12 months to kind of establish the partnership and to be able to build on it in future years, hopefully. So it looks at 5 areas. So there's climate finance and commercial models that have been identified. So that's very much kind of tapping into the kind of experience of these organisations in being able to develop their own financing mechanisms and commercial models. There's some intelligence there that we can kind of tap into and use as part of the work that we're doing on, say, the climate fund kind of work that we've talked about already in this committee meeting. So it would be worthwhile kind of tapping into that and exploring the models that they've applied to see how it could benefit us as a region, really. The second one is really around financial offers. So we've delivered lots of programmes that provide kind of support to our businesses and residents around to help them decarbonise. So we've got the ReBiz programme, the business sustainability programme that we know about. We've got the loans that have kind of been live, and the solar collective kind of buying kind of process. So you know, there is appetite obviously out there across West Yorkshire to do more of this. So the partners already have some financial offers out there for residents as it stands and businesses as it stands. So, for example, Daikin, who one of the partners, have got a 0% loan offer on heat pumps, which is quite attractive, really. So there's obviously some knowledge and experience. So again, it'd be worth tapping into that and understanding that and working with those organisations to see what could be done in that space as part of the partnership. The next one is around the sustainable home centres, though. There's a real commitment here to, and a real acknowledgement of the fact that behaviour change is going to be absolutely key to delivering some of the work, well, a lot of what we need to happen to get to 2038 net zero target. So this is about establishing sustainable home centres in each of the district centres for people to go in and look at technologies to understand what a heat pump looks like, what solar looks like, all those different technologies. And there's already a commitment from one of the partners to do that, and they're looking to kind of bring the others in on board with that. But that's at no cost to the combined authority to kind of do that, or local authority to do that. They just see it as a really good piece of activity to do to really demonstrate the value of some of these technologies. There's a matchmaking service. We all know the fact that we can't do this as just the public sector, so we need to be able to kind of work with the private sector to deliver some of this. And part of that is making connections with organisations around who might need to decarbonise, don't know how to decarbonise, want to take advantage of the support that may be on offer from each of those organisations. Just to flag, that's no obligation, that matchmaking, but it's an opportunity for those conversations to take place and to explore and make those links that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have made. And then the final one is around workshops and events. So this is very much helping us to try and drive forward activity which engages residents, engages businesses, helps us think about how do we pull this all together as a collective ambition for West Yorkshire. It ties in obviously very closely with that Sustainable Homes Centre piece, but it's really about running those and doing the donkey work, I suppose, in terms of moving those kind of workshops and events forward, so that we can actually reach more people and engage with more people. So that's kind of the areas in focus. I just wanted to address previous concerns that had been raised in these meetings as well in terms of the partnership, and that was very much around the perception that there might be an unfair advantage for the 4 private sector organisations that were part of that, and also the fact that it might disadvantage some of the smaller organisations that are operating in West Yorkshire. So how we've tried to overcome those two kind of concerns, we set up the MOU that's governing this partnership in a way that it's very clear that we will adhere to public procurement rules. So wherever it is a combined authority funded scheme, that will be subject to public procurement rules, and the 4 private sector partners will need to bid for it as anybody else will. So we've been very, very clear with them that is kind of what will happen in terms of any kind of funding activity. And we're also, as an organisation, very, very committed to making sure that all opportunities are really kind of publicised to quite a wide audience. You know, we want to give opportunity for all to kind of bid in for funding and schemes that we have. The other point in terms of the points around giving at disadvantages, again, it links into that procurement piece in terms of we are committed to sharing information. So if we feel as though information that we've talked about as part of the partnership might give them a competitive advantage, we would be committed to actually providing that information as part of the procurement processes as well. So everybody is privy to the same information as the 4 private sector partners. So hopefully that gives some confidence that we aren't giving an unfair advantage to those kind of 4 organisations as part of the partnership, and it is purely, you know, them recognising the scale of the challenge and wanting to try and help and move the agenda forward within West Yorkshire. So happy to hand back to you, Chair, and take any questions there might be.
Thank you. So I'm really opening the floor for questions or any feedback on the action plan. Okay. I think it's nice that you're so clear and transparent, because you're right, there has been a lot of questions in previous meetings about this kind of relationship, and I think it's really great that being open and transparent, and you know, that's really good. Thank you, Noel. Well, thank you everyone, and thank you for your patience. Just a reminder, as we get to the close, the date of the next meeting is the 22nd of July, but that is subject to the calendar of meetings being approved by the combined authority itself, where their annual meeting is in June, but assume it's the 22nd of July for your calendars. Okay. All right. Thank you. Bring the meeting to a close. Thanks.
Thank you.